All right, hello and welcome to another PNP Live. My name is Bashan. I'm part of the event staff with Politics and Prose. Today, we'd like to welcome the second of a three-part series celebrating the Hurston Wright Legacy Award nominations. This particular program is going to focus on the nonfiction category. Before we continue further, I'm just going to go over a couple quick housekeeping items. The first is that throughout this event, you'll be able to go to the chat section and you can find links to purchase copies of the different works from these different authors directly from the Politics and Prose website. Of course, we highly encourage that as that helps us facilitate these events in the first place. Additionally, if anyone would like to ask any questions of the authors at any point, we ask that you place them in the separate Q&A box, which is near the chat, so that can just help us to facilitate the question and answer period. This live event, like I said, is focused on the Hurston Wright Legacy Award. The award itself honors the best in Black literature in the United States and around the globe. Introduced in 2001, the Legacy Award was the first national award presented to Black writers by a national organization of Black writers. Fiction, nonfiction, and poetry honorees are selected in a juried competition. I would like to ask everyone to join us in celebrating these 2020 nominees, once again for the nonfiction category. And also, all donations that are made today will be going to the Hurston Wright Foundation. This event is going to be moderated by Mr. Ralph Eubanks. And without any further ado, Mr. Eubanks, it's all yours.
Thank you, and welcome to everyone for this reading from the Hurston Wright Foundation. I want to introduce each of the writers who will be reading from their works of nonfiction today, and I'm going to introduce them in the order in which they're going to read. First, we have Danny Mclean, who is nominated for her book, We Live for the We, The Political Power of Black Motherhood, published by Bold Type Books. Next, we have Clyde W. Ford, who is nominated for his memoir, Think Black, which recounts the story of his father, first software engineer at IBM. Next, we have Saidiya Hartman, who is a nominee for her book, Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments, published by W.W. Norton. And next we have Albert Woodfox and his book, Solitary, which was also a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award for Nonfiction. And finally, we have Damon Ryder, who is the author of What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Blacker, a memoir and essays, published by Echo HarperCollins. So I want to turn it over now to each of them to read, starting with Danny Mclean.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be on the stage, on this virtual stage with all of the other finalists. And unfortunately, I have to cut out about 15 minutes early. So if I miss the very end of the Q&A, I apologize for that. So this is from the introduction. This is the very start of the book. When I was 7 or 8 years old, my mother put on Whitney Houston's recording of Greatest Love of All every day before we left home for school and work, and we sang along from start to finish. We stood in the living room in those moments before we shrugged on our coats and belted out lyrics about self-reliance and refusing to let the possibility of failure keep us from trying. We wrapped ourselves in the richness and power of Whitney's voice, reaching for the high notes right along with her. I can't remember how long this lasted. It could have been weeks or even months, but I remember it as a defining ritual of my childhood. We weren't much of a singing family, but in the mid-'80s, my mother made sure that we shrouded ourselves in a kind of armor through song and remembered who we were before facing a day that was sure to challenge us. She's too young now, but I plan to do something similar with my daughter, Isabel, who has just turned 2 at the time of this writing. For her, I might build a ritual around Nina Simone's To Be Young, Gifted, and Black, or maybe the Donna or maybe the Donny Hathaway version. Black children and their families need this, I think. We need a kind of anthem, a melodic reminder to ourselves and each other that we are not who the wider world too often tells us we are: criminal, disposable, lazy, undeserving of health or peace or laughter. This book is about my quest as a new mother to help my daughter understand as early as possible who she is and what she came to do on this beleaguered planet. It reflects on our experiences in the first years of her life and weaves together interviews with Black mothers and grandmothers who are further along this journey and generous with their stories of triumphs and tribulations. I've chosen to focus on mothers rather than parents more broadly because my reporting was driven by my most urgent questions. I am Black and I am a woman. These aspects of my identity will shape how I guide my daughter. Throughout the book, I sometimes choose the verb to mother over the noun motherhood, an approach I learned from Alexis Pauline Gumbs, China Martins, and Maya Williams, co-editors of the book Revolutionary Mothering. Mothering is an action done by a range of people, including grandmothers, aunts, and queer and gender nonconforming people who don't identify as women, but who see themselves engaging in, as Gumbs puts it, the practice of creating, nurturing, affirming, and supporting life. This book sets out to broaden a conversation established by the current wave of writing on motherhood, which has tended to focus on white, middle-class women's experiences. These writings frame motherhood as something that robs women of our professional ambitions, gets us off track as earners, and reminds us that biology and age-old gender roles are indeed destiny. I can relate to funny anecdotes about sleep deprivation, toddlers' antics, and ruined sex lives, but these articles and books rarely address the politics of mothering, namely issues of power, position, and protection. I know that motherhood is deeply political. Black women are more likely to die during pregnancy or birth than women of any other race. I endured health problems during my pregnancy and had only white medical providers, so I've thought a lot about the link between bias in healthcare and maternal mortality. My own mother, who has never married and who worked full-time throughout my childhood, is a model for my own parenting. But culture war messages from the left and the right tell us she fell short of maternal ideals. My grandmother, great-grandmother, aunts, and elders in the community supported my mother as she raised me. Their investment in me and in other children, some their blood relations, some not, demonstrated an ethic of care and mutual aid that we can all learn from. For this book, I spoke with mothers who have ties to movements for social, political, and cultural change. I sought them out because I found it likely that they had at some point grappled with the questions I am facing as a new parent. They are parents to young children and parents to grown-ups. They are parents to siblings and to only children. They are partnered and single. They include educators and health workers, academics and retirees, artists and spiritual guides, a therapist, a city planner, and many organizers and activists. The title, We Live for the We, is something one of these mothers, Kat Brooks, often tells her 12-year-old daughter when their individual desires come up against some larger community need. Quote, "Our job as Black mothers is to keep pushing the liberation ball down the court. Our obligation is to leave the world better for them and to ensure that they are equipped with the tools that they need to fight," Brooks, an organizer, told me when I interviewed her. "I tell my daughter all the time, and it's harsh, but we don't live for the I, we live for the we," end quote. With her words, Brooks brought contemporary meaning to something I'd read in scholarship on Black motherhood. Historically, Black women have engaged in what sociologist Patricia Hill Collins has called other mothering, a system of care through which they are accountable to and work on behalf of all Black children in a particular community. This broad understanding of family responsibility often became a launchpad for public service. Collins writes, quote, "For many women, what began as the daily expression of their obligations as community other mothers developed into full-fledged roles as community leaders," end quote. In addition to serving as other mothers, we've had to fight for our right to be mothers. Prior to emancipation, enslaved people could not lay legal claim to their children. The child of an enslaved woman was someone's property. For the more than 400 years since the inception of slavery on this continent, Black women have had to inhabit a different understanding of motherhood in order to navigate American life. If we merely accepted the status quo and failed to challenge the forces that have kept Black people and women oppressed, then we participated in our own and our children's destruction. This has been especially evident in recent years as dozens of Black women and men have had to stand before television cameras telling the world that their recently slain children were in fact human beings, were in fact loved and sources of joy, despite whatever stories law enforcement or conservative media were telling about why they deserved their untimely deaths. In these moments, I've been reminded of how much is asked of Black parents and of how politically powerful Black parenting can be. The mothers of those killed by police or vigilante violence embody every Black mother's deepest fears, that we will not be able to adequately protect our children from or prepare them for a world that has to be convinced of their worth. Many parents speak of feeling more fear and anxiety once they take responsibility for keeping another human alive and well, but Black women especially know fear, how to live despite it, and how to metabolize it for our children so they're not consumed by it. I don't want to run out my time, so I think.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Danny.
I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yes. So Clyde, moving on to you.
Thank you very much. And what a pleasure it is to be with all of these other wonderful authors virtually. And if I don't get a chance to say that, I wish you all the most success next week in receiving the Hurston Wright Legacy Award in Nonfiction. I'm going to read a short selection from my recent memoir, Think Black. My dad, John Stanley Ford, was the first Black software engineer in America. He worked for IBM, was hired in 1946. 25 years later, I also went to work for the company. So I want to contrast my first day at work with his first day at work. And after that, I'll read just a little bit more from the book as well, too. This is my first day going to work at IBM. I held fast to an overhead bar as the elevated train I rode in swayed from side to side, rocketing into Manhattan from the Bronx. When it dove beneath the Harlem River, everything outside the car went dark, and I caught a reflection of myself in the window. A ballooned afro, pork chop sideburns, a blue zoot suit with red pinstripes, a fire engine red turtleneck, and a trench coat with its collar turned up. A half hour later, as I strutted from the subway through the light rain hanging over Wall Street, humming the theme from the song Shaft, which I had seen the film the night before, I fancied myself as the movie's Black hero about to engage in battle with the white troops of injustice arrayed before me. I entered one of the skyscrapers, squeezed into the financial district, and took an elevator to a higher floor. There, stenciled in blue, the sign on the glass doors read IBM, and beneath it in white, New York Financial Office. I grasped the door handle but paused, catching another glimpse of myself in the glass door pane. I shook my head, unsure of what to make of this decision, unready to push through those glass doors, uncertain of what fate awaited me on the other side of this threshold. On that fall day in 1971, I was young and Black, defiant and angry, and more than ever determined not to be like my father. Yet there I stood, about to report for work at IBM, where he'd worked for 25 years. My dad's first day. A generation earlier in 1947, my father also gazed across a similar threshold into an IBM office in New York City. He was a member of the greatest generation and had been a first lieutenant in the famed 369th Black Infantry Regiment of the United States Army. From the photographs I saw of my father as a young man at 27 years old, he cut a handsome figure in his dark gray suit, red striped tie, and wide brimmed hat with a satin band. But instead of defiance, he masked diffidence. Instead of anger, he displayed anticipation. Instead of determination not to be like his father, he stood ready to prove to everyone, including his father, that he deserved to be the first Black systems engineer at IBM. It was the late 1940s, post-World War II America. Anything was possible. Duke Ellington swung jazz, Jackie Robinson swung a big league bat, Brown versus Board of Education swung its way through the courts. Nowhere were new possibilities and promises felt more deeply than in Harlem, which was then Black America's gravitational center. In a city college classroom on the edge of Harlem, an accounting professor invited one of her students to dinner. The Black GI arrived at her swanky apartment dressed to the nines. And Thomas J. Watson Sr., the founder of IBM, stepped from the shadows. Watson offered my father a job, and a Branch Rickey, Jackie Robinson moment ensued, the start of an unknown chapter in the history of modern day computers.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes.
When I'm going to Saidiya Hartman, so turn it over to you to read now.
Okay, great. And I too am honored to be here among these other wonderful writers. And I'm going to read an excerpt from a chapter called A Minor Figure. The small naked figure reclines on the arabesque sofa. Looking at the photograph, it is easy to mistake her for some other negress, lump her with all the delinquent girls working Lombard Street and Middle Alley, lose sight of her among the surplus colored women in the city, condemn and pity the child whore. Everyone has a different story to share. Fragments of her life are woven with the stories of girls resembling her and girls nothing like her. Stories held together by longing, betrayal, lies, and disappointment. The newspaper article confuses her with another girl, gets her name wrong. Photographs of the tenement where she lives regularly appear in the police briefs and the charity reports, but you can barely see her peering out of the third floor window. The caption makes no mention of her, noting only the moral hazard of the one-room kitchenette, the foul condition of the toilets, and the noise of the air shaft. The photograph taken of her in the attic studio is the one that is most familiar. It is how the world still remembers her. Had her name been scribbled on the back of the album in print, there would be at least one fact I could convey with a measure of certainty, one detail that I would not have to guess, one less obstacle in retracing the girl's path through the streets of the city. Had the photographer or one of the young men assisting him in the studio recorded her name, I might have been able to find her in the 1900 census, or discover if she ever resided at the shelter for colored orphans, or danced on the stage of the Lafayette Theater, or if she ended up at the Magdalene House when there was nowhere else to go. Her friends refused to tell the authorities anything, but even they didn't know how she arrived at the house on the outskirts of the 7th Ward, or what happened in the studio that afternoon. The Irish housekeeper thought she was the Black cook, old Margaret's niece, and neglecting her work as they were wont to do, had wandered from the kitchen to the studio. Old Margaret, no kin to the girl, believed that Mr. Akins had lured her to the attic with the promise of a few coins, but never said what she feared. The social worker later assigned to the girl's case never saw the photograph. She blamed the girl's mother and the slum for all the terrible things that happened and filled in the blanks on the personal history form, never listening for any other answer. Age of first sexual offense was the only question without certain reply. From these bits and pieces, it has been difficult to know where to begin or even what to call her. The fiction of a proper name would evade the dilemma, not resolve it. It would only postpone the question, who is she? I suppose I could call her Maddie or Kit or Ethel or Mabel. Any of these names would do and would be the kind of name common to a young colored woman at the beginning of the 20th century. There are other names reserved for the dark: Sugar Plum, Peaches, Pretty Baby, and Little Bit. Names imposed on girls like her that hint at the pleasures afforded by intimate acts performed in rented rooms and dimly lit hallways. And there are the aliases too, the identities slipped on and discarded, a Mrs. quickly affixed to a lover's name, or one borrowed from a favorite actress to invent a new life, or the protective cover offered by the surname of a maternal grandmother's dead cousin, all to elude the law, keep your name out of the police register, hold the past at a safe distance, forget what grown men did to girls behind closed doors. The names and the stories rush together. The singular life of this particular girl becomes interwoven with those of other young women who crossed her path, shared her circumstances, danced with her in the chorus, stayed in the room next door in a Harlem tenement, spent 60 days together at the workhouse, and made an errant path through the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful. So I'll turn it now to Albert Woodfox. Mr. Woodfox.
Well, thank you. I'd like to thank, Hurston Wright for acknowledging Solitary and all the other books that, we are trying to make the people aware of. I'm going to read about the foundation that allowed me to survive 44 years and 10 months of solitary confinement. There's the ultimate unity, and it's called friendship. We had to be strong so the prison administration could not break us. I loved and cherished their friendship. I didn't know how so much loyalty and devotion could exist between three men. We had been through so much brutality, so much pain and suffering that we had every right to be hard, bitter, and hateful toward almost everyone and everything in life. But instead, we did not allow prison to shape us. We defined ourselves. We didn't agree on everything. We could argue like cats and dogs. It was never personal though. We were three strong men who had different positions on some political issues, and we get into sometimes. But even in anger and frustration, we held each other in the highest possible regard. I never doubted they were honest in their ideas and feelings and analysis. We listened to one another. We had each other, great character in the others. Hartman and King would rather lose their lives than betray me, and I felt the same way about both of them. We never lost the faith. Hartman wrote a poem that, for me, expressed who we had to be to survive. We were men of steel. And I quote, "Man of steel, my keepers believe I'm the man of steel, ripping and running in and out of life as if this shit ain't real. They frame me for murder, and when their conspiracy is exposed and they are all deposed, the judge declared case closed. Equal access to justice, equal access to rule. Doctrines never meant for the man of steel, but to terminate 40 years of this indomitable will. Maybe my soul is that of concrete, maybe it is that of wind. Maybe it is that of fire. Maybe it is the spirit of the people. The spirit of my ancestors, whatever my keepers, wish my soul to be, the man of steel is always free.
Thank you, Mr. Woodfox. So, Mr. Young, turn it over to you now.
Yeah, again, I just want to just express how much of an honor it is to be recognized and to be here with y'all today. This is surreal. And the part I'm going to read from the book is from the last chapter called Zoe, which is addressed to my daughter, who was 3 years old at the time of writing. She is 4 now. Not great at math. She will know why there's a small broom on the wall underneath the picture of our wedding day. And she will know what jumping the broom means and where that act originated from. If she's interested in college, she will know that despite neither of her parents attending an historically Black college or university, Black colleges are legitimate options. She will be able to code switch, but she will never be pressured by her parents to do so. She will be taught the third verse of Lift Every Voice and Sing, which I didn't even know existed until a year before she was born. She will eat healthy-ish soul food. I haven't quite decided when an appropriate age for her to use nigga will be, but I want her to know and be comfortable with that word. I want her to eventually be a veteran nigga user like her mom and dad. I desired meeting and marrying a woman I could nigga banter with. Now that I found that, I look forward to providing nigger youth mentorship for our daughter. Perhaps she'll never be interested enough in spades to learn how to play it, but she'll see Alicia and I challenge and beat our friends enough and have so much fun doing it that it'll be hard for Zoe to resist that temptation. And she will also know that her grade of Blackness cannot be determined by how quickly she takes the spades, how easily she learns the wobble, or how interested she is in rap music. She will know that there is no such thing as grades of Blackness. She will know that she was born Black, and there's nothing she can do to not be Black, and that if she chooses to do a thing, anything, that thing is officially Black enough by virtue of her deciding to do it or be it. She will be taught that while Black people have been victims of oppression, subjugation, bias, and hate, and while we face these things in various forms and in various measures of intensity for the duration of the hundreds of years we've been in America, Blackness itself is not the problem. Her Blackness is not our problem. It's not her skin. It's not her hair. It's not the way she looks. It's not the way she talks. It's not the blood coursing through her veins. It's none of the trillions of particles and elements that decided through divine providence to comprise her. She'll be taught that whiteness needs Blackness, the nigger specifically, in order to possess and retain its value. She will learn that whiteness requires something it could point to and claim itself to be better than. She will know that it needs that whipping boy and that bedtime story and that cautionary tale in order to sleep and to find a reason for waking. She will be told that the man who was elected president in 2016 was anointed because of whiteness's urgent desire to preserve its supremacy and be elevated above the nigger, even if that elevation is self-destructive. Since whiteness was invented, Blackness has been positioned as unseemly and uncivilized and demented and dirty. Blackness is to whiteness the puddle you attempt to avoid when crossing the street. And if whiteness is feeling particularly ambitious that day, Blackness is the puddle you place a jacket over so that other whites can step across it without being muddy. Perhaps, after learning this, she will be compelled to believe that Blackness is the antithesis of whiteness. After nearly a half millennium of the nimble propaganda of white supremacy, it is natural and freeing and vindicating and deliciously petty to believe that whiteness is the source of all evil and Blackness is the light. However tempting this is, I'll remind her that this belief would merely mimic the humanity of whiteness, which is a lesser and incomplete way of encapsulating our existence. She will be taught that while humanity can be sublime, if you're a human, you're capable of evil. You are capable of oppressing. You're capable of everything the invention of whiteness has done to the people who have not been deemed white, and everything that inventing whiteness has done to the people deemed white. But she will also be taught that because of this ceaseless racial antagonism, Blackness allows for humanity to be stretched and extended and amplified and evolved in a way both those who oppress and those who would benefit from oppression aren't able to experience. Blackness forces you to love harder. It forces you to entertain a concept of forgiveness and choose whether or not it's a thing you're interested in possessing. It forces your hugs and your kisses and your daps to be tighter and longer, like a book you read ever so slowly because you're just not quite ready yet for it to end. It forces improvisation to be an immutable function of life. It forces you to seek solace and respite and community wherever they can be found, which makes you more cognizant of the world's crevices and margins and ellipses in any other space where those twinkles of colony might be stashed. She will be taught, above all else, that she could be whoever and whatever she wants to be. And this is where I have to stop, because this is where I'm stuck. This is where, if she retains the things I will teach her, and if she continues to be as curious and as thoughtful and as intuitive and as quick and as skeptical as she currently is, she might eventually ask how. How can she be whoever and whatever she wants to be if there's a hulking and devious 500-year-old forest constructed specifically to prevent her from doing that? How can she have a limitless future in the same America that killed a grandmother who died 2 years before she was born? She might not yet know what the word paradox means, but she will know that what I've taught her is paradoxical. How can all of those great things about her potential be possible, be true, if they exist at the same time as this other thing, the other thing does? If my daughter asks me those questions, I'll have no choice but to be honest with her. I don't know. I will tell her that despite the knowledge and experience her dad possesses, I do not know how such a thing is possible. I don't know how my little Black girl can be all she can be when she could bounce in the lap of her grandfather, my dad, a man who was so much wittier and kinder and worldlier than so many of the white men who have been my teachers and lawyers and doctors and accountants and college basketball coaches, but has never and will never experience the success and the status and the privilege that has come to them. Dad is 68 years older than Zoe is, and the America he was born in is different from the one she was. This is true. The ceiling that lurked above him and everyone else born Black, the ceiling that lurked above him and everyone else born Black back then has been punctured. There are holes in it now wide enough to inch through, but the ceiling is still there. She is still in danger. She is still thought to be a threat. She will still have people see her and assume she's older and stronger and tougher than she actually is. She will still encounter nurses and doctors who will assume she doesn't experience pain the same way little white girls do. She will still have her intelligence doubted, as if it's not possible to be that Black and also be that sharp. She will still have to watch racism and sexism join forces and attempt to pathologize her. She will still contend with the water torture of racial microaggressions. She will still exist in the same country, in the same region, in the same state, in the same county, in the same zip code, in the same city, in the same voting district, in the same neighborhood, in the same block, in the same school, and in the same classroom with people who will look at her sweet and brown and perfect little round face and see nothing but a nigger. I don't know, I will tell my daughter, she asks how it's possible to be all these things I told her she could be, if America is all the things I've told her it can be. I don't know how it happens. I don't know how it's possible. I don't possess the level of intelligence necessary to understand how both these things can exist at the same time. But I know it happens, Zoe. I know it's possible. I know you can and will be the things I said you can be. If the conversation goes anything like the conversations that we have now, she will ponder what I said, she will nod her head, and she will leave to go find herself another adventure to lose herself in. I will watch her scurry away, this miracle. And I will see Alicia. I will see Dad. I will see Mom. I will see me. And I will smile. And then I will hope, and I will wish, and I will dream, and I will pray to God that she believed me. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really, all those are really wonderful readings. And I love the way that they all really connect together from the beginning to the end, showing that, I mean, there's this, I think this feeling we often encounter as Black people, that everyone says there is a Black experience, not realizing there are lots of Black experiences. And one thing that really connects them is the thing that you brought up, Damon, that idea of improvisation. We are all, that's what we all do, is improvise. I want to start with a question for Danny, because it's really nice starting off with you and ending with Damon, you know, motherhood and fatherhood. Parenting by its very nature is anxiety provoking. I'm the father of three, grown and now in their 20s, and I'm still I still have a lot of anxiety, particularly the world they're in right now. What is it that a Black parent can do right now to, if you could name maybe one or two things that any Black parent could do right now to raise their children with dignity and joy, what would it be?
The one thing that came up again and again as I was interviewing the dozens of folks that I spoke to for the book was this idea of community. And I almost even hesitate to say it because I think there's a way that that word has become empty. It's a word that we throw around a lot. You know, this idea that that community can protect us from these the negative forces in our lives. I think the word is used a lot without people just explaining exactly what they mean by that and how to form community. And I think one of the privileges of the book was getting to talk to mothers and grandmothers who have spent, you know, years and decades figuring out how to build networks for their children. So, you know, I have a chapter on schools where I talk about parents wrestling with a decision, you know, where do they want to put their kids in school? Do they want to, are they kind of listening to and believing these ideas about, you know, success in academics and choosing these schools that have high test scores and that have these outcomes that are associated with success? If so, and that means putting their children in, you know, a predominantly white environment, how are they dealing with the psychic damage that their kids are experiencing, you know, in these environments? When I talked to parents who had put their children in predominantly white schools, they talked about how important it was to find peers, you know, a peer group for their children outside of that school, so that the kids were having their identities reinforced in a way that was positive and reaffirming. So, you know, that's just one example of what was discussed. And I think what I really learned from those conversations was that it's not just for Isabel, it's not just for my daughter who's now 4. I need that community. So when I'm looking around for peers who I want to put her with, I'm also looking for friends for me. I'm also looking for people who will keep me on track, who will, you know, support me, who will be the people who I can ask questions of. So that's, you know, I would say community. And I also just quickly want to mention, because I used the predominantly white school environment, you know, I also had the benefit of talking to people who created something formal. You know, here in Cincinnati where I live, there's somebody who created a youth development program called Sankofa. I talked to some parents who created Little Maroons, which is a preschool co-op and after school program in Brooklyn years ago. So I got a lot of tips, and I think readers of the book will find specifics about that how do I actually create community, whether it be something ad hoc and something that's just like fun and friendship, or something, or I want to create an institution that's going to be able to provide community for my children, my family, and for families to come.
Thank you. So, Mr. Ford, I mean, I was taken by the shaft kind of beginning of your your book, you know, you're coming in like a bad mother, shut your mouth. This seems to be a book that's really about race and technology. Would you say that that's a fair way to describe your book? And what is that intersection between race and technology, if that is indeed the case?
Thank you. Absolutely, it is. I thought, however, this was going to be, I started out writing a feel-good book, which was basically a Jackie Robinson story where my dad was in the role of Jackie Robinson, becoming the first African-American software engineer, like Jackie was the first Black Major League Baseball player. Very quickly into understanding the world and the IBM that my dad stepped into, I was then to discover that this is a company, IBM, that was very deeply involved in automating the eugenics program, and in particular, a study on identifying mixed-race individuals on the island of Jamaica for forced sterilization and other programs by which eugenicists sought to eliminate those they considered undesirable. I then was to discover that IBM was the automating force behind Hitler and the Third Reich, who actually automated every aspect of the Germans' war machine, including how Jews in concentration camps would be killed. I then discovered that using the same technology, IBM was the automating force behind apartheid in South Africa, actually designing special equipment to print the passbooks used to discriminate and segregate Blacks from whites from colored population. And I then was to discover that with a similar idea, IBM was to become the automating force behind the use of facial recognition technology to discriminate against people based on their skin color. So very quickly, Think Black became a lot more than a memoir and much more about a cautionary tale about the relationship of technology and race and racism, and how we today, unless we are going to be actively engaged in determining how technology is used and how we use technology, that technology in and of itself may be one of the very impediments to our progress in the future. So thank you for asking that question. It was amazing to me to peel back the layers of a company that my dad worked for, that I worked for, to discover all of this.
So what, you know, essentially, I mean, there's a question here in the chat and I'm kind of following in on that, is that this idea of Black humanity and agency is connected. You see it as connected through technology, that in some ways what IBM was doing was robbing Black people of that agency.
Well, I mean, early in their history, and let me just also say that IBM recently got a new CEO, a person of color, Arvind Krishna, and the first thing he did was to pull back the company from doing any further work in the area of facial recognition technology, which I think is just great. But early in its history, this technology was built on the back of exploiting people of color and people of different races. That is, unfortunately, the nature of so many technologies. We can go right back, as I do in the book, to the 1500s and the technology of European sailing ships, who were designed in order to get themselves around the western tip of Africa in order to get slaves. And we can go on to the cotton gin, and we can go on and look at all of these ways in which technology has often not been a friend of African Americans, of people of color, and it is up to us to learn about that history so we won't be subject to it, and so that it won't repeat in the future as well, too.
Thank you. Dr. Hartman, I'm really taken by your work and this whole idea you have in trying to, I guess, really reconstruct lives of what you call critical fabulation. Could you really tell us a little bit about that idea, how critical fabulation really drives your work in the archives?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question, because that is at the center of my work. I mean, my work has focused on anonymous figures or quote unquote minor lives. So often I work with these, you know, scraps or traces in the archive and try to build story from that, because when we think about historical processes, when we think about radical social transformation, when we think about things like the March on Washington, those who make it possible are all of those the unnamed multitude, right? And so how do we actually then think about narrating history from the perspective of that unnamed, unknown multitude? So I utilize a variety of archival elements combined with imagination and speculation to fill out some of those gaps and silences in the archive so that the, average figure and their agency comes into view.
That's really wonderful, because I mean, I know you also deal a lot with the whole history of slavery, which kind of leads me to Mr. Woodfox, who was in a place, Angola State Prison, which is the closest thing we still have to slavery in this country. So, Mr. Woodfox, I know, could you tell us, I mean, I heard you speak here in Oxford, Mississippi at the Mass Incarceration Conference about a year ago. And I was very moved by your experience. What do you see about kind of the connection between mass incarceration and the legacy of slavery?
Well, I think Brother Ford put it in eloquent technology. Technology made, mass incarceration without technology would require an unbelievable amount of manpower. So technology that's being used in prison now, you have one individual who can supervise 200-300 people, who can control it. That is one of the reasons why solitary confinement has become so prevalent in prison systems in America and around the world, because of the control factor, the technology that's being used now. In my book, I talk about, when I was released from prison, it took me maybe 2-3 weeks, maybe a month to realize that the only thing that had really changed in society was technology, that the foundation, the basis of racism, and whether it was institutional or political, cultural, or individual, and the systemic application was greatly enhanced by the technology that exists in society today. And so, I've always, been aware that the power that technology plays in maintaining racism in this country. Brother Ford just put it in a more eloquent way than I probably would, and I thank him for that, and it's definitely something that we have to be aware of, in the development of society in the future, how technology is used.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of leads to Mr. Young, because I think what's great, I think you really use technology in a lot of ways to kind of get your voice out there with very smart brothers. But there's something from your book that I was really taken by, and there's this line you say that being Black in America is to exist in a ceaseless state of absurdity. And could you, talk a little bit about that? I think we all know what that ceaseless state of absurdity is. I know, but I want you to tell us how you see that ceaseless state of absurdity.
So you think of things that are absurd, at least when I think of absurdity, I think of humor, right? And I was obsessed with this HBO show, I May Destroy You. And the creator of it, Michelle LaCroix, I've read like every interview that she's done, every profile, all of it, because I'm like obsessed with her brain. And in one of the profiles, I forgot, maybe it was with Elle or somebody, they asked her about how she uses humor in these very traumatic subject matter, very traumatic situations, but it still has humor in it. And her response was that, I just don't remove it. I don't inject humor in these situations. The humor is there all the time. I just do not remove it when I'm telling my stories. And when I write, when I tell the stories in the book, I'm just always cognizant, or try to be hyper cognizant of the fact that some of this shit that happens, yeah, it's awful, it's violent, but it's also like absurd. It's also surreal. And again, we have a history of people finding, space in that absurdity and that surreality, with Black comics, with Black writers, with Black filmmakers, whatever. And so with my work, I just really lean into that, really lean into just the absurd nature of our existence in America.
Well, I think that's it. I mean, that absurd existence, I think, is probably what's driven the work of every writer that's here. It's the absurdity of our existence that I mean, with Dr. Hartman, the stories that are hidden, that are unexplained, the things in our culture that people don't want to confront.
Yeah, it's violent and terrifying that Donald Trump is president, but it's also fucking absurd that this guy is the president of the United States. Like it's absurd. It's something. It's almost like something that you couldn't write. You couldn't actually create this. It's that absurd. And there are so many different circumstances and so many different just examples of that just throughout Black American life. And some of them are good. I mean, not all of them are bad. Also there are some parts of the absurdity that are also like, oh, this is awesome. This is great.
Yeah, I mean, there is that absurdity. I mean, I think going back to Clyde, that absurdity of there was a lot of tension between you and your father. It was, you're going into IBM. You're going in the exact opposite of him. I think he's kind of going in this idea of Black respectability, and you're just saying, I'm throwing that all out the window. I'm going to be me, who I see as myself. I mean, I guess it's this idea that I think that going back to what Damon said, that Blackness is a problem, that we see it as a problem. And what is it that we as writers can do to keep Blackness from being seen as a problem? I guess that's something I'd like to ask each of you. So, Dr. Hartman, you're smiling there. Thought I'll pick on you, just like I do in my class.
No, I mean, I'm smiling because Du Bois famously, Souls of Black Folks said, how does it feel to be a problem? Right. And he was, thinking about the position of the Negro in the US and the Americas more generally. And I think that for him, what he tried to do was historicize the problem, that the problem is not a givenness, that the problem is about a social relationship. And that social relationship is domination, exploitation, oppression, marginalization. And I think he really also attended to the ways in which the way we know the world, all those means, whether it's sociology or politics or medicine, continues to produce Black life as itself the problem, when the problem is the social order in which we live and which makes Black life impossible. So that's the way I would address the question of the problem.
Okay. Mr. Ford, what about you? How would you address that problem?
I think that the way I would address it as a writer is to help Black folks understand, just as Dr. Hartman said, the problem is not them. The problem is out there. And the more you understand about the out there and the historical nature of the out there, the more you can let go of the sense of the problem being in here. I think too many of us as African Americans grow up believing the problem's here and internalize that in ways that are very destructive. My dad did that. He considered himself to be less smart than his IBM colleagues because of the color of his skin. He even rated my sister's children based on their skin colors as to their intelligence, and would whisper selective phrases to each other. That's an indication of the problem being turned inside. And I think if we've learned anything as people of color and as authors here, it is that we are not the problem. The problem is out there, and yet we can keep explicating why that problem is out there. And we can keep telling the stories to show that the problem is the society that puts upon us these strictures and these restrictions.
Mr. Woodfox,
Yes.
thoughts about that too? I mean, I think I mean, you went to a prison that was very segregated.
Yes. You know, socially, we have a tendency to want to be amongst people who we look like, who we have so many things in common and stuff, you know. So I think for me, on maybe a subconscious level, that contributes, or it makes the perpetrators of racism in this country much easier for them to do what they do. Again, we go, all this is interconnected. We go back to what Brother Ford said about technology and how it's being used. And I think we live in a political system or economic system that does everything it can to prevent and end the racism. It perpetuates racism, it uses racism, you know. And then if you somehow manage to get past that, then there the it's classism, I guess you could say, that exists in this country, where people who enjoys the same class status in society have a tendency to forget where they come from, what they experienced of their ancestors, you know, and they start identifying with the class that they are involved in, you know. So we got a lot of work to do, but it all starts with understanding. You know, one of the best books I've read was a book called The Nature of Prejudice. It was by a German sociologist called Gardner Alport. And the book taught me the difference between, recognize the difference between prejudice and racism. You know, and I would, you know, suggest for anyone who gets an opportunity to read that book, to read it. You know, and the thing about it was written back in the 50s, and then it was by a German sociologist. So, you know, given the history of the German, the Nazis in Germany and stuff, you know, I thought it was a profound piece of work. You know, but you know, Robert and I, when we go around and we speak, you know, Robert has a phrase I really love. It's about throwing pebbles in a pond. You know, we all don't have to throw the same kind of pebble or the same size of pebble, but every time we throw a pebble in a pond, it creates a ripple. And if you throw enough pebbles, those ripples become a tsunami, and a tsunami is a force for change. Now, what kind of change, you know, is going to be determined by the people themselves, whether it's going to be a good change or bad change. And, you know, so I think, you know, one of the things that's really a pet peeve with me is how we forget history. We forget, you know, our people have been in slavery 400 years plus in this country. And we've had every imaginable indignity visited upon us as a people, but yet we still standing. And I think we have to remember that.
Thank you. So I'd like you to have the last word, Mr. Young. Your thoughts?
Okay, sure. Yeah, and you know, all these answers, I mean, I really don't have anything to add, really, because you all covered it so beautifully. I guess the only thing I would really just say is that we have to just realize in our work and that the problem ain't us, that it's them. And we just have to love and tell the truth and care and love people who love Black people. And, you know, there's this whole concept of respectability where, you know, where people who are the people who are convinced that we are a problem try to do things to appease or try to like apply some sort of behavioral deodorant in a way that'll make them more palatable to white people. And, you know, just recognize that anyone that needs to be convinced of your humanity can't be convinced of your humanity. Like that's just a fallacy. You just can't possibly do that. So why even try? Just do what you do, love who you can love, create the work that you can create, and, you know, let them figure out that problem themselves because they're the one who created it.
That sounds like a wonderful place to end our discussion. So I want to thank all of you, Clyde Ford, Saidiya Hartman, Damon Young, Albert Woodfox, and Danny Maclean, who's since now left us, but I want to thank you all, and I want to tell everyone out there to buy your books.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. And again, thanks everybody up there. Good luck next week to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I will join in and just say thank you to everyone, and also thank you to everyone who's attended this event and who's been with us this time. Again, you can go to the Politics and Prose website to purchase each of these books from these award-nominated authors. Also, the last event in this three-part series of the Hurston Wright Legacy Award readings will occur on Thursday, October 15th. So a little few days at 6 p.m. And again, we want to thank everyone for attending, thank the authors for their wonderful conversation, and we hope that you all have a good day.
Thank you.
It's been a real pleasure.
Bye now.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you all.